who I'm about to bring up. We're going to go fishing tonight. And if those of you who don't know me, I am Pam McNeil. I'm also known as the Teen Transformer. And I work with families with Black youth to prepare them for competitive college and career. And so tonight we're going to be meeting with Mr. Bennie M. Williams of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So, Bennie, are you ready to join us? Come on in the room. Hey, Bennie, how you doing?
Ms. McNeil, how are you? Thank you so much for having me this evening.
Well, can I call you Bennie? You can just call me Pam. Come on now.
That sounds good.
So, I'm glad to have you with us today. We're talking, hopefully, our audience is folks, young people and their parents. And so, I wanted to have you on because you have a unique experience working with as a marine biologist, a fish biologist. And so, introduce yourself. Tell the audience a little bit about who you are, and take it away.
Well, well, first of all, uh, uh, I grew up here in D.C., and so I'm a homeboy. My mom's from D.C. My dad was from California. Grew up on Park Road between Georgia and Sherman Avenue, and attended Bruce Elementary School, which was the same elementary school my mom went to. I, um, I guess from kindergarten through third grade. Now, for the time period, I remember in first grade, this is circa, I'd say 1962, 63. Um, the schools were so overcrowded at Bruce at that time that I could only go a half a day. And so I know at that point, my mom and dad said, "Oh no, we cannot have this." So at that point, they were looking to move to another ward, educational ward. And at that time, Lafayette Elementary over here, which is now Ward 4, was one of the best elementary schools you could go to. And this was a very unique experience because when I was at Bruce, we would um, draw with broken up crayons in a old cigar box, and there was no grass on the playground. I think we had a couple swings and a merry-go-round. And so when we moved over to where I live now, across the street from Rock Creek Park, and I went in Lafayette, it was a whole nother world. Uh, some of the young people watching this might not be aware of the Board of Topeka decision in 1954 dealing with separate but unequal schools. But man, when I went to Lafayette, you talk about separate and unequal. Lafayette had a recreation center. They had tennis courts. They had basketball courts. They had a track. When we wanted to draw a color, we had brand new crayons. And then all the books that we used were 2 years ahead of the books that we were using at Bruce. So that left a lasting impression on me in terms of the reality of education in D.C. So after that, after I graduated from Lafayette, I was accepted into Sidwell Friends School. That's the same school the Obama girls attended. A great, awesome school. What a blessing I was able to go there. They reward you for thinking. And it was a very unique private school in Washington because it had more minorities and it was co ed. So that was a very nurturing environment for high school. So then after that, I got accepted at Dartmouth College, and that was a very interesting phenomenon because at that time, it was at Dartmouth where I really did not know about the true reality of what it's like to be a person of color. And that was the first place I got called nigger was in Hanover, New Hampshire, my freshman
Wow.
year. And
Wow.
that was a mind blowing experience. You know, I was a football player, and all the brothers on the freshman team that were quarterbacks got converted to defensive backs. And it was an eye opening experience. But to get back to my field, and you know, it was um, that really opened my eyes for what I would face in my career. So at that time, there were not a lot of PhDs in fishery science. Now, you know, biological science in general is a huge field, and then when it comes to
Mhm.
the field of fisheries, there you have genetics, you have reproduction, and then when you talk about water types, you have freshwater fisheries, you have brackish water. These are the fish that call or inhabit the bays. That's estuarine science, estuarine fisheries.
Mhm.
And then you have fish that live in salt water, which are marine fisheries. So that's, three separate fields into itself. Now, ironically, when it comes to my love for studying all things aquatic, my mom saved pictures. I was drawing underwater scenes in kindergarten, Pam. I know
Mhm.
not know where this came from, but I just have always been fascinated with underwater life. And growing up, my mom didn't and dad didn't know a lot, but they nurtured it. And some of the things they did was, I don't know how many how and why books I went through. How and why on fossils, how and why on minerals and rocks, how and why on reptiles. I just ate those books up. And
Mhm.
then they also had me gave me a subscription to National Geographic. And that goes all over the world. So that just stoked
Right.
my interest with the great pictures and life, from all over the world. And then they also got me a subscription to Ranger Rick. And then I guess just a little bit after I started Sidwell, then the Jacques Cousteau's programs came out, and I was utterly fascinated. Here's this guy that darn, where, darn near invented scuba diving and all
Mhm.
these underwater scenes. I was in love. I didn't miss not one of those. I did not miss not one of those. So, to make a long story short, I attended three schools. I attended Dartmouth, I attended Morehouse on transfer for a while, and I finished at UDC with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science and Associate Applied Science and Marine Science. And the reason I ended up going there is when I was down in Morehouse, my mother went to UDC and met a Dr. Jose Jones. Jose Jones was head of the Environmental Science Department at UDC. Now, this man was an incredible mentor and role model. Dr. Jones was a decorated war veteran from the Korean War. He was a underwater demolitions expert. He was a master scuba diver. Okay, he had a black belt in Taekwondo. He got his master's from Howard in biology and a PhD in marine biology at Georgetown University. He was a Fulbright scholar and did his PhD on the effects of sea urchin on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Now, where do you find someone like that? He was the first person I ever met that looked like me.
I was
And
just going to say, and this was a black man.
yes, member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity. Um, and the most incredible thing like that, he was adopted. He was an orphan, and he
Mm.
loved to teach, and he was just an unbelievable mentor. And so he really nurtured my interest while I was at UDC. So I never had to look for a summer job because I was working at the Water Resources Research Center or the Agriculture Resources Research Center. They hooked their students up with jobs. I was the tutor for environmental science. In my last 2 years of school, I worked full time and went to school full time. I was working for the district government doing the lead and drinking water program with the water hygiene branch of the Housing and Environmental Regulation Administration, which is now the DC Department of Energy and the Environment. So I'm getting to one of my eureka moments here. And this is why I tell young people all the time, keep trying things. Now, if you
Mhm.
try something and you don't like it, that does not mean it's a failure. You're just learning more about yourself and what you don't want to do, so you got to keep searching. So,
Right.
while I was an environmental health technician with the district government, studying the lead and drinking water problem that they had in Palisades, One of the biologists down the hall from the fisheries program said, "Can you come help us out because one of the biologists called in sick today?" I said, "I'd be happy to do that." So before I know it, here I am out on,
Excuse me.
bless you, hon. Here I'm out on the Potomac on a beautiful sunny day with my sunglasses on and my swimming trunks on a boat going underneath Key Bridge, and I'm sampling fish. We're pulling fish up and measuring fish, and like I'm getting paid for this. Real, I mean, I'm just in awe. I mean, I'm just loving what I'm doing, and I'm getting paid for it. And that was like my big eureka moment. I said, okay, I know now what it is I want to do. So what I
Mhm.
did at that point, I was like my sophomore junior year at UDC. When I graduated and got my Bachelor of Science, I applied for a fish biologist position with the district, and I got it. And that was such a great job. I've sampled all the waters. The district has 110 miles of coastline. It is an incredible recreation fishery. One of the things I did do while I was there, besides sampling the water, I also managed the first fishing license program we had at BP for the first time. So now I tell you once again, young people, follow your passion. You don't know where you're going to end up. So while that was one of my duties, I'm sitting at my desk at Blue Plains. I get a call, pick up the phone. Who is it? It's Sarah Maltby. Well, who's Sarah Maltby? Well, she's the secretary for President George Bush. She called me. She said, "Is this where President Bush goes to get a fishing license?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." "Well, we would like to invite you to the Oval Office to present President George Bush Sr., of course, with a fishing license." And I had the opportunity to do that. So, once
Wow.
again, I'm giving you another idea. Just follow your passion, young people. Try different things, but my father, bless his heart in heaven, he told me in elementary school, he said, "Son, if you can find a job that you love, you don't hate going to work." That's what being rich is all about. And
Mhm.
so I am so blessed to have been in this field and been able to pursue this field. And then further on, I took a class in electrofishing techniques. One of the way we sample fish, we have a boat and we run electricity through the water, stun the fish, we scoop them up with nets, and we bring them on board and measure them, take all their statistics, and we turn them to the water. Well, I took this class up in Kearneysville, West Virginia, with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And the gentleman who taught the class, Dr. James Reynolds, was the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit Director at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we started talking. And I had the opportunity to go to graduate school in Alaska. Now, all of my buddies told me I was crazy. "Benny, you go, it's cold. It's so cold up there. Why do you want to go up there? Benny, there are 12 guys for every one woman. Why would you want to go to Alaska, for God's sake?" But see, I had this love of fish. And the commercial fishery in Alaska is larger than the entire other 49 states. It was fishing heaven. And so I know what it's like, Pam, to be out on a stream on the Alaska Peninsula with a 7/8 weight fly rod, casting it into the stream, where the salmon are coming up in the stream so thick you could almost walk across the stream on their backs.
Wow.
Now, underneath a mountain with a glacier and double rainbows behind me, it was a heavenly moment. I mean, this scenery, this where I was, had not changed since the last ice age. It was absolutely gorgeous. The only thing I always made me very nervous is because there are brown bears walking around that weigh 1,400 pounds. Now, I wear I wear a 12 triple E shoe, and
Uh-huh.
at one of my stations, Chickenick Lake on the southwestern peninsula, I was camped out about 30 yards from the shoreline. I got up the next day and walked down, and I saw these bear tracks. He'd walk right along the shoreline while I was in the tent sleep. Well, I fit both my feet in one paw print, Pam, and the toe print was 3 or 4, 5 inches in front of the paw print. There are some very huge bears. especially on the peninsula, because one of the reasons down there it doesn't get that cold. See, the grizzly bears in the interior of the United States, well, they hibernate for at least 6 or 7 months. But
Hmm.
in Alaska, they might only hibernate 2 or 3 months, and the rest of the time they out eating. And
So
what?
they get to be pretty big.
Humongous, humongous. Do you hear me? And the worst thing you ever want to do is get in between a mom, a sow,
Hmm.
and her cubs, and that's it. So, but it was so funny after I came back from Alaska and came back to D.C. It seemed so tame because I mean, unless you have had that experience of getting dropped off in a bush plane 70 or 80 miles from nowhere and you're camping out at the intersection of two bear trails, um, and there's not, the only thing between you and the tent is a little piece of nylon. But believe it or not, the bears weren't even the worst part about Alaska.
What's the
The
worst
bugs
part?
were the worst part.
What was?
The bugs.
Oh, the bugs.
Bugs in Alaska. Oh my gosh. They darken the sky. Okay? You have the most fierce mosquitoes that drive those caribou herds along the northern slope, and they can pull a pint of blood from a young calf every day. Okay?
The mosquito.
Yes, yes. They have more different types of mosquitoes up in Alaska than they do in the tropics. Then you have these flies called black sox flies that have anesthesia in their proboscis, and when they bite you, you can't feel them because they have anesthetic in there. And so one day I did the stupidest thing. I went shorts. I went out in shorts when we were out sampling, and I looked down. And I was bleeding by about 15, 60 different places on my legs where the flies had already hit me and left, and the blood's just drooling out from the bite. But
Wow.
but most of all, the
You never
gnats.
made that mistake again.
Oh my goodness, no. The gnats were the worst. I mean, swarms of gnats that darken the sky. And they fly in your nose, in your eyes, in your mouth, in your ears. They're horrific. So by far the scariest thing there was the bugs. So it's so funny.
Wow.
I came back home and people, oh, a mosquito, a mosquito. I looked at them like, you have no idea. This is
And you spent how long in Alaska?
6 years, Pam. 6 years.
Wow.
And
So they
so that
didn't
was
scare you. They didn't scare you away, immediately.
no,
You
no,
acclimated.
no. But let me tell you, in this field, we face a lot because there are very few of us. And but I don't want people to not try it because the one thing we have to do is show people we have more in common than we do different. And then we have to dispel the myth that we are anything less than anybody else. And so I want you all to stand up tall and be strong. And don't let anyone that doesn't know your ability try to put you down. Stand
Amen.
tall, stand strong. One of the best pieces of advice my father gave me, third or fourth grade, he said, "Son, I know you're a Black American, uh, and this is a fact. You're going to have to be 3 to 4 times as good to get the same job as your white counterpart. But I'm not going to let you use that as an excuse to fail. You're just going to have to be 3 to 4 times as good."
Hmm.
And the other great piece of advice he gave me was pick your battles wisely.
Hmm.
And that was very key because I had an experience when I was working in Sierra National Forest in California. We were doing stream habitat inventory and mapping. And on my last day, we were having a barbecue out by the pool, me and the staff members. And a Native American fire crew member came down. I'd never met him before. And he picked up the London broil off the platter in front of me and he held it up my nose and said, "Are you going to eat this?" and use the N word in my face. Didn't see that coming. And so I'm leaving the next day to go to graduate school. So if I lost my temper and hit him, the last thing we need is another brother in jail.
Right.
And it just wasn't worth it. But I had to pull him close and said, "How dare you use that word against me after what the white man did to your people?"
Mm-hmm.
But here's the genius of it, people. Read all you can. Get the real history that these politicians now are trying to prevent you from reading, because it's essential you know the real history of America, and that is going to inspire you even further when you read the real history. Okay,
Right.
that's very important, because if you might say now, well, if I wasn't as woke as I was, I might have done something really stupid. But
Right.
see, I had an opportunity in front of me that was worth not responding um, in the way I wanted to respond. So, young people, always pick your battles wisely. That's so important. And you got to get out there and try all types of jobs and all types of opportunities. And so I must also add that um, the more you try, the easier it's going to be for you to find your passion. But you never know unless you try it. Because quite
Mm-hmm.
honestly, up until I started working for the District of Columbia and I met Dr. Jose Jones, I didn't even know careers like this were available. And now in the Fish and Wildlife Service, it's a lot more than a biologist. They're looking for people in genetics. They're looking for people in botany. They're looking for people in all types of technologies, fish health, veterinary science. Um, we have, and then at the other hand, you have the administrative aspect. There are lots of different jobs in this service, and we need some more people to color. And now's the time to strike while the fire's hot. So I shared some links with Pam, and I urge you all to go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service homepage, and you can read a little bit about the type of careers in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also become acquainted with USA Jobs. And that's the way you apply for a position with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Another agency that has jobs similar to ours is NOAA Fisheries, which is Department of Commerce. And then, depending on what state that you live in, each state has a fish and wildlife agency that you can look to get employed in.
All right. I put up the first link, which is USFS, USFW. And then I'm gonna just run through a few of them. Then you have the NSF Emerge program.
Yes, National Science Foundation.
Okay. And then there's the American Conservation
Conservation
Experience.
experience. Yep.
Give people a minute to sort of see what those are saying. And then there's the MANRRS. What does that stand for?
Manners program. That's minorities and agricultural and natural resources and related sciences.
Okay.
We're using that a lot in the Fish and Wildlife Service right now, and to get young people interested, when they come out of high school and they go into college, to get them some internships to see some of the things that we do.
Okay, that's great. And then I didn't get the actual links, but I wanted to put these up as well. I think if they Google it, they'll find the links to the USDA 1890 National Scholars Program.
Yes, and that's a very important one too, because that one works with historical Black institutions, Pam.
Okay. And
Yep,
then
with the U.S.
you
Department of
have
Agriculture.
the Conservation Career Experience Program.
Yes. So there are some opportunities. So get out there and Google. And also, let me also point out some other things. For I also worked at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for 6 years, where the final 4 years I wrote fishery management plans. Now, what you have to realize is how do we manage fish? Well, statisticians and biologists and policymakers get together, and what they have to do, they have to assess the status of the stock. So let's look at a very famous fish in this area is the striped bass.
Mm-hmm.
The striped bass, there are three spawning populations of striped bass on the Atlantic coast. You have the Hudson River, Chesapeake Bay, and the Albemarle Roanoke spawning populations. And what we do, we sample these fish to see if they're healthy and how much harvest they can withstand, because we don't want to fish them down to a point that they cannot naturally reproduce. As a matter of fact, the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA are required to put out a biennial report on Atlantic striped bass every 2 years and report it to Congress, because it's a very important both commercial and recreational species. But the whole thing about fishery management, we have to monitor the population and assess it, and then agree on how many fish can get harvested without harming the stock. I give you a good example. A couple years back, when Paul Prudhomme came out with his black and redfish recipe, that really uh,
Mm-hmm.
blew up the harvest of red drum. Now, red drum is a cyanid fish. I won't go any further on that with the technical words, but other fish that are cyanids are red drum, black drum, um, speckled trout, weak fish. You also have a freshwater drum, and the males of this species, when they go into spawning, they can make noises that attract the females while they're spawning. Now, this is a very good example. So red drum, believe it or not, can live for 65 years. So
Wow.
in this population of fish, there are what we call 65 age classes. Now, a lot of time when you harvest red drum, you will see, well, you can keep only one fish between 22 and 38 inches. Reason being is you do not want to harvest the females, the large females of that species, because the females are the most fecund and they have the greatest ability to reproduce and keep the stock healthy. But say if they're six, they can be 65 years old, and then you fish down the stock to where they're only 32-year-olds, and a stock where the fish should be able to reach 65. Then if that population is going to replenish, it's going to take some years to
Mm-hmm.
fill out those other age classes.
Well, this has been so enjoyable, Benny. Can you imagine that we have been talking for almost a full 30 minutes? And so I've enjoyed it because I had a ton of questions for you, and you've answered most of my questions as you spoke. But as we wrap up, let's what would you leave the audience with in terms of, okay, you've left dropped a lot of gems, but if fisheries or fish and wildlife is maybe not their avenue, what's the takeaway for what our audience in general should just know about recreational fishing? And do you encourage them to try it if they haven't?
Well, recreational fishing is my favorite hobby. Obviously, that's why I got into it. Um, another one of my great eureka moments. My parents rented a cottage up in Hyannis, Massachusetts, in the summer. We knew a lady, Cape Verdean lady there, bless her heart, and we rented a cottage, and we went out deep sea fishing. And on this trip, folks, I caught an 8.5 pound black sea bass. And reeling in that fish was the greatest high of my life. My imagination just zoomed. I'm fighting this fish. Oh my God, what do I have? What do I have? And held it up, and I was so proud. And I was never the same after that. That brought me such joy.
How old were you, Benny?
Eighth grade. I was eighth grader.
Okay.
Okay, so I was eighth grade, so I guess 14, about 14 to 15 years old. And I never forgot that. And after that, I never looked back because it brought me so much great joy. But I'm also currently working on a story on, there's some things you have to be aware of. First of all, you always want to get your fishing license if you're 16 or older, up to 65. Now, it's very important because that fishing license helps fund the management of the fish in your jurisdiction, in your
Okay.
state, and so forth. So that's very important to maintaining a
So if
health.
you're 66, you don't need a license. What happens when you're over 65?
All you have to do is fill it out,
Okay.
and I can do that this year. First, so I'm really tickled about that. But the other thing I wanted to share right quick, because I know we don't have much time, but you also don't want to spread invasive species, aquatic species. That's
What
a
does that
very
mean?
invasive species are non-native species that have been introduced in our aquatic habitats here in the United States. I'll give you a perfect example. We had a fishing event over in Anacostia Park, and one of the young kids picked up a blue catfish. Well, a blue catfish is not native to the Chesapeake Bay watershed. It is to the Mississippi and Missouri River, but not to where we are. And
Hmm.
as a result, see, they are omnivores. They eat darn near anything. And they love blue crabs. So they can negatively impact the blue crab population because they never had that predator. Another
Hmm.
one is the northern snakehead, which was discovered in Crofton while I was working at Maryland Department of Natural Resources and is now reproducing in the Chesapeake watershed. And they recently did a study in Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge. It's a joint study between Maryland DNR and Fish and Wildlife Service. And they are now showing that native fish species like croaker and spot are decreasing because of the presence of these northern snakeheads. And now they're finding, realizing that when the blue crabs molt, that's when they shed their skin. They're very vulnerable because they have no shell.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
northern snakeheads are just sucking them up. And now crabs are going to be expensive this year
Wow.
because when you have non-native species like blue catfish and northern snakeheads just guzzling anything they see, it's a problem. So you don't want to spread. So when you go fishing, if say you want to get some minnows, you ask that bait dealer, is this minnow native to this area? Another one you really got to be careful for is don't use green crabs. Green crabs were from Asia and Europe. Now they have been introduced there in the entire United States, and now they were recently detected in Alaska. And green crabs eat everything, not everything,
Wow.
everything.
Okay.
Eat other crabs, eat crayfish, mussels. They're just vacuum cleaners.
Wow.
So that's one of the things we want to be a very responsible fisherman. We want to make sure we don't spread invasive species. We get a fishing license to help fund the management of the species. But for all of you all, I hope you will enjoy and have tight lines because when I caught that sea bass, I was never the same.
Well, thank you so very much, Mr. Bennie Williams. And I hope that our audience has learned a little bit more about fish and what our aquatic systems. And just again, you just dropped so many gems about how to find your passion, how to pick your battles, and
Let me
we
add one other thing, Pam. Let me add one
sure.
other thing. You always keep the faith because you never know what's around the corner. So I was 38 years old working at Maryland DNR, and I was ever wondering if I'm ever going to make my age in thousands. And I applied for a job. I applied for a job and I met this man, Hannibal Bolton, at the American Fisheries Society conference. He called me up 9 months later, say you want a job, applied for the job, and I jumped from 38,000 to 64,000 in one job. And so
Wow.
you never know when what you're doing is preparing you to be that perfect puzzle piece that someone is looking for. And because I was writing fishery management plans, he was looking for someone to coordinate interjurisdictional management on a national level with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So keep the faith, keep your passion. You never know what's around the corner.
Thank you again so very much. And with that, we're going to wrap up for today, but come back and join us next Sunday. And every Sunday, we're here at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube, and very intermittently on LinkedIn. And if you can, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and see you next Sunday or sometime in the future. Again, thank you, Benny. It's been great. We'll have to have you back again soon.
Thank you for having me, Miss McNeil.